Hello everybody and welcome back to another Flutter tutorial. So in today's video, what we're going to be doing is talking about buttons and button callbacks. So the goal of this video is going to be to add a button to this text input field here that we can press. When we press that button, we will take the text that's in the field, we will put it somewhere else on the screen, so hopefully in a text widget or something like that, and then we will clear the input field. So that's what we're going to be aiming to do. This is going to kind of be building the component of our app that will allow us to actually get user input. So if we're talking about some kind of blog app or messaging app or whatever we end up actually creating, we're going to need some way for the user to type something in. So that's what we're going to be doing here. It's just making that widget that we'll be keeping likely for the rest of these videos. So with that being said, let's get started. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the state from here that has to deal with text. So if we see inside of here, that's where we left off last time, we had this text showing up. And essentially when you would type, as you type, and I mean, I can just show you, it shows up right underneath. Now we don't want that anymore. We just want it so that when you press a button, which we're going to add, then it actually pops up that message. So we're going to remove this text for right now, and we're not actually going to be doing anything with a regular text widget inside of this anymore. So that means I can get rid of change text. I'm going to get rid of this onChanged event as well. We're not going to be using that. So I can remove that comma there too. And then I'm going to get rid of the text right here. And I think that should be about it. Okay, so that's all we need to remove. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the button that's actually going to go on the right-hand side of where our little message box is here. So we could technically, well, we have a column here, but we could technically have a row and we could have the text input field and then a separate button beside it. But I actually want to overlay the button right on top of the text field so it looks nice and it'll have a little logo there. So we'll use an icon for it and I'll show you how that looks. So anyways, what we're going to do is get rid of column here. So we don't need the column. So I can get rid of these square brackets like that. I think I can actually remove one more set of brackets and let's just save so we get a nice format here. Now I'm going to go inside of the input decoration. So input decoration, sorry, is this one. And I'm going to add a icon for, the suffix. So prefix obviously means before, suffix is after. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a suffix icon, which is actually going to be a button. So let's go. If I could find the U key, suffix icon, and here we're going to say icon button. So let's just save that so we get a nice format here. So rather than just an icon, this is actually going to be a button. This is just the widget used for that. We're going to pick the icon that we want. So we'll say icons dot, and in this case, I want to say message or something. So let's do message. Actually, no, we already used that one. Sorry. Let's do icon dot send, and I guess that's going to be the icon. Let's see what's going on here. So for the icon, I just remembered, sorry, we need to do icon, and then inside of that, we can say icons.send. So just like we did here, we said icon.message, we need to say icon button, icon is equal to icon, icons.send. I think it's a little bit confusing why they do it like this, but that's fine, we'll do that. And then what else do we need here? Well, since we have the icon, now we need to add something for when you actually press the icon. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say on pressed, and for now, we're just gonna leave this blank. So I'm just gonna make a blank arrow function because we don't actually have anything to put here yet. So this, don't worry about this. This is just so it doesn't crash yet. And that when I refresh, we can actually see what this looks like. So now we look at the window and we can see that we actually have this button right here. You can see what happens when I press on it like that. And we'll add a few other options just to see what we can do with the buttons. But that is the button right there. You can see I can click on it, obviously different than this message icon, which is not interactive at all. So let me add a few other things to this icon. So for the icon button, I think we can do something like splash color or some other cool things. So splash color essentially is what color does this splash, or like what color splashes on it when you press on it. So what we can do here is we can say color, and then we can pick the color that we want. Sorry, colors, and then we can pick the color. So there's a bunch of different colors we can choose from. I want to pick something that's going to show up just so we can see it really easily. So I'm going to go with blue. So colors.blue. And now let's have a look at what happens if I save that file and I press on the button. We get a nice blue splash. So maybe you don't want the blue, you can change that to whatever color you want, but I just want to show you there's all kinds of options like that. And again, you can hover over the icon button and you can see all of the different things that we can give. So we can give it a hover color, highlight color, splash color, autofocus, tooltip, all of that. And in fact, it actually might not be a bad idea to add a tooltip just to tell us what this actually means. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say tooltip. And then I think we can just actually put a string here. And for the string, we're just going to say post message. Now we're going to change some of this text, and once we have a better idea of what this is actually going to be, the app that we're making, we'll leave that there for now. Okay, so let's have a look at it now. And if I hover over it, does it give me anything? The tooltip is not showing up. Maybe there's something else that gives us like something when we actually hover over top of it. Disabled, tooltip, autofocus. Okay, so I just realized just by hovering over tooltip that this actually tells us exactly what this is. So this text is displayed when the user long presses on the button and is used for accessibility. Okay, so let's just see what happens if I long press now. There we go, we get post message. So I wasn't sure how to activate that before, but now we can actually see what that is. So that's actually pretty useful. And someone can just long press and see what it does. Okay, so now that we have that, what I want to do is I actually want to modify my home page to be a stateful widget. The idea here is that what I want to do is I want to have a text field on my home page, and when we press the button in the text input widget, so when we press that, it actually modifies the home page. So I'll show you how we can do that, but we need to make this a stateful widget because the text that's going to be displayed on the home page is going to have a state, right? It will change based on what the user does and them interacting with the program or with the application. So we'll copy this build method here. So copy that, and we'll use our shortcut. So just STFUL to make a stateful widget, press enter, and now we'll just name it the same thing, so my home page like that. Okay, now we'll override this build method, we'll just copy in what we had before, and we should be good to go with a stateful widget for my home page. So let's have a look here, looks like everything's working fine, and now what I'm going to do is just add a state to my home page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do exactly what we did before, and I'm going to say string text like that. We'll set it equal to a blank string to start. And now inside of the body, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a column, and I'm going to add the text input widget as well as a text widget, again, like we did in the text input widget before we deleted that. So let's go column, oops, like that. I believe we need to say children, and that's a colon, that's going to be widget, and a list like that. And then inside of the list, we're going to take our text input widget, and we are going to put a text widget. Now the text is going to have this .text as its text, and if we save it now, we'll get a nice format, and this is what we're going to have for our body. So really straightforward, just have that widget that we already have there, then we'll have some text, and this will be equal to this .text. Now, how are we actually going to modify this text here when the button is pressed all the way down here? Because notice that this is in a different class, so I can't really actually access this text widget from down here. Because previously we had some method, that method used the controller and it changed the text or it cleared it or it did something like that, right? But that was inside this class. All of the stuff was in the same class. So how can I make it so this button here actually modifies this text up here? Well, this is where we could talk about something called a callback. So on our button, of course, we have a method called onPressed. What that does is it tells us what to do when we press the button. So right now I've just made a blank function. This is just like, imagine just an empty function that does nothing. That's what I've put right here right now, just so it doesn't crash. But what we could do is we could make a method. We could say void, void click or something like that. And then we could call this .click, right? So inside of here, just like we did previously, we'd say this .click. And then what would happen is whenever we press the button, it would call this method. So we'll actually leave this here for now, but the idea is, how do I modify this text? So what we're actually going to do is use a callback. And what a callback is essentially we pass a function to this text input widget, and when the button is pressed, it will call the function that we passed it. So we can write a function or a method, whatever you want to call it, right inside of our homepage. So we'll write one inside of here, and then we'll pass it as a constructor argument to text input widget. It will save that in here as a callback, and then we will call the callback when this is pressed. So that means that we can actually call a method that is not on our class, and since that method is in another class, it can access, say, the text attribute right here. So I know this is very abstract right now if you haven't seen something like this before, but what we're going to start by doing is just making a method on my homepage state that we want to be called when the button is pressed. So we'll hook it up after, but imagine that this is being called when that button is pressed. So I'm going to say change text is what I want this to be called, and it needs to take a parameter of text. So we'll just say string text like that. And then inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot text equals text like that. Now, the important thing to remember though is that we need to wrap this inside of set state, because if we don't, then it will modify the text, but it won't re-render the widget. So we won't actually see any of those updates happening. So let's say this dot set state. Then inside of here, we will take this line and we will paste it. Okay, so now we are modifying the text whenever we call this method. So we'll change this up here, and that in turn will change this. And since we've wrapped it in set state, that will re-render the widget. Now what we need to do is we need to give this method to the text input widget. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a constructor inside of text input widget that takes one parameter, which is the method that we want to use as a callback. So we're going to start by saying function string callback. Oops, if I can hit the L key. Callback like that. So function string callback. What this is saying is that we're going to have a property of this class, which is a callback. It is a function. The function takes a string as one of the arguments. So you can see the reason I did that is because we have string text here. Say I change this to number text or int text or widget text or whatever it is, then I would have to change the corresponding type here as well. Now, if you hover over the widget, you see it's giving us this blue squiggly. It's saying this class or a class that this class inherits from is marked as immutable, but one or more of its instant fields are not final. So what this means, this is an immutable widget or an immutable class, so we can't modify any of the properties on it. So we just need to change this to be final. And what this essentially is saying, what am I getting? The final variable callback must be initialized. Okay, let's just do function callback. Okay, I think we can fix this later. But anyways, final function callback, final function string callback. So this is just saying this is going to be final. Once this is set, we are not going to change it. That's what this line says right here when we declare something as final. So now what we need to do is we need to make a constructor that's actually going to define what callback is. So to make a constructor, all we do is we type text input widget. So the name of our widget like that. We put 2 brackets, we can do our semicolon like that. And then inside of here, we write this dot callback. And in fact, we're not actually going to put it inside of curly braces. What happens when you put curly braces is that saying that this is going to be an optional named parameter. So right now, this is just like a regular function. If we think of a constructor, we must pass it one callback to be able to actually create this text input widget. We have to give it something. And you can see that because if we look at text input widget, it's telling us 1 positional argument expected, but 0 found. That's because we just put this dot callback here. So we're defining, we have 1 argument or 1 parameter that needs to be passed. Now, if I change this to be inside of curly braces, notice that this squiggly line goes away. That's because this now makes this an optional parameter that's named. So that means now if I want to pass a callback, I can, but I don't have to. So if I want to pass one, then what I have to do is I have to say callback colon, and I have to pass the callback there. So that means this is going to be a named optional parameter, so we need to define the name, whereas if we don't have the curly braces, we don't have to give a name at all. We can just pass 1 argument into the function. Now, if we put this inside of square brackets here, this is an unnamed optional parameter. So that means that we don't have to do callback like that. And in fact, notice I'm not getting the autocomplete for it. I would just put the function here, but I don't have to because it's optional. So anyways, I hope that makes sense, but we will leave this as just a mandatory parameter that we have to pass in, so a required parameter. And then inside of here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass this change text function here that we want to give to the constructor. So we're going to say this dot change text. Now, it's very important that you don't include the brackets at the end. The brackets at the end actually signify a call to the function. So if I have a function, right, and let's just say, I don't really want to define another one, but if we say void test, void test, for some reason I just cannot type. If we have test, we say void test like that. If we just type test, what this actually is a reference to what this function is or where this function is. You can think of it as like a variable that's holding the reference to this function. So if I just type test or I use test, I'm not calling the function, so I'm not going to execute anything that's inside of it, but I will have access to where it is. So let's say I do something like x equals test. What I can actually do is I can call x because x is equal to test. Test is a function, so I can call the function. That's kind of what this is saying, right? If I have a callback, so let's go now back to the original example. if I have this function here and I don't call it and I just pass it through, then we're going to assign callback equal to this.changeText. So now whenever I call callback, which we haven't done yet, it will call change text. So I hope that makes sense, but I just want to go into enough detail that no one's super confused. So what we're going to do now is we already have onPress set up with this.click. So inside of click, we are going to call the callback. So we define the callback inside of here. So how do I actually get that or use that from the other class? Because notice we have two classes here. This one is handling all the constructor stuff, and this one is actually handling all the state. So if I go inside of here, what I can do is I can use this fancy word called widget. And what that does is it references this class right here. So it has access to anything that's inside of this class when I use widget. So I can say widget.callback, because callback is right here, and I can actually access that. And then I can say widget.callback like that, and I have to give it one parameter, which is going to be text, right? Because if we look at callback, we can see it change text has one parameter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it controller.text like that. Now the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to say controller.clear. So what's going to happen is we are going to call the callback function, and then we are going to clear the text input field, because whenever we press the button, we've submitted our message or our post or whatever it is. So let's just do a quick summary, and then I'll show you how all of this works. We have my app, which I'm not going to go through. We already know how that works. We now have a stateful widget for our homepage. And inside of here, we have one state, which is text, right? We have a method called change text. This is going to be our callback function. It simply changes the text here to be equal to whatever text we pass in. We have a method here, which is the build method. What we do is we use a scaffold, which we've talked about before. We have an app bar, which is that little thing at the top. We have a body with a column. Inside of the column, we have the text input widget. We pass that callback function that we want to use when the button is pressed. And then we have text, which is going to be equal to whatever is up here. So this.text. Next, we have our text input widget. This is going to take a callback. So that's a mandatory parameter we must give whenever we create this. And then what we have is the state for all of that. So we have this dispose method that gets rid of all the resources once we're done with this. We have a controller that handles the text field controlling, so clearing and getting the text. We have a method called click. When this is called, we call the widget callback, which is what is defined right here. Then we clear the field, and this is drawing all of the stuff, and we've already gone over how that works. So let's have a look at our app now and see if everything is working. So let me just type hello and press the button, and nothing is happening. So let me just refresh this and make sure I've saved, and let's try it again. And unfortunately, nothing is happening. Okay, so I just had to refresh the app. Seems like it's working now. I just had to rebuild it. But if I go and I type hello, and I press enter, we can see that it shows up right underneath. And now I can say now or something. I can say, hi, my name is Tim, and that will show up down there as well. So that is kind of what I wanted to accomplish and what the goal of this video was. Essentially type something in, press enter, and it shows up underneath what we just typed in, underneath this message box. And it will change every single time. And say if I delete all this stuff, doesn't delete anything else, let's just hit that again, and it is working. So in the next video, what I think we're going to do is make it so that we can see a list of all of these different things and we can scroll through them. And then we'll make a widget that's going to hold this text, and we'll have it nice and formatted. It will have a like button, a dislike button, whatever we end up doing, it'll be something along those lines. So anyways, that has been it for this video. If you guys enjoyed, do make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I will see you again in the next Flutter tutorial.